Hi, folks. This is your friendly neighborhood banker, and I do not typically weigh in on the political side and the infighting within the comics world. Um, I'm just usually here as a fan, giving my 2 cents on the actual work itself. But seeing this, I was so moved that I felt I had to put in my 2 cents. So Tom King comes out with this tweet, and he says, "Today DC put out an alternate cover to Rorschach by Jae Lee." So Rorschach is the new book based in the Watchmen universe that Tom King has been contracted to be a writer on. And he goes on to say, by Rorschach by Jae Lee, who has also done covers for Comicsgate, a hate group. DC does not consult creators on alternate covers. I reached out to them to express my deep disappointment. As far as I'm concerned, this is the cover to Rorschach #1, and he shows the basic, generic, pretty boring Rorschach #1 cover. So, all right, let's unpack this a bit. So, first and foremost, as far as I'm aware, now I know people come down hard on either side of this, but one thing I would say is Comicsgate, as far as I know, is not an organization that has done like a treaty or manifesto or anything like that all of these quote unquote Comicsgate people have signed, specifically stating all of their positions and saying what they're all about. I think it is a generalized term to describe a number of creators and people who have some similar opinions and left some aspects of the industry in order to start doing their own things. But I don't think they all hold the same opinions at the same time. And there's no leader as far as I'm concerned. There's no, like fascist, man with a mustache on the other end of Comicsgate that is sitting on his throne room, twirling his mustache, and dictating to everyone what they should do. I don't believe they have coordinated efforts. So it's a little odd to call them a group in the first place. So the whole Comicsgate being a hate group, calling them a hate group is strange because as far as I know, they don't all have the same opinions. And like there are some I follow and some I don't. And there are some whose art I really enjoy, and there's some whose commentary I enjoy, and there's some I don't as much. So I don't, as a fan, consider them all on a like part of the same organization. So I'm not sure why other people do. Um, what's particularly odd and disturbing about this is two things. The first is calling a group a hate group that doesn't have a clearly defined or even a clear definition of who they say they are, right? So you point to known hate groups like take the KKK, for example. They have charters, they have organizational structures, they have a whole infrastructure. You have to apply to be a member of these groups, okay? And they're horrible. Um, and what's weird is the the knee-jerk reaction to paint people with a broad brush. And what's particularly strange is people like Tom King, who are, I believe, are trying to defend people who may be in marginalized groups from being painted with a broad brush, then go on to paint other people who they disagree with a broad brush. And you can see this in your personal life. You have conversations with your family, your friends, and all those conversations you have with them are, yeah, man, I can't believe that they say all this about us, whatever we are, whoever we are, whatever characteristics we share. But then when they're sometimes you catch them when they're discussing other people, whether that's conservatives or liberals, of people of this descent or people from these neighborhoods or with these values or with these cultures, and you see them say, "Oh, all these people are blah 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 blah." It's like, how do you vilify being painted with a broad brush? And I guess people don't realize they do it to other people. I think you are inappropriately charging this Comicsgate group as a hate group, or painting them all with a broad brush, or making extremely generalized statements about them in the same way you might resent how they supposedly paint you with a broad brush, or kind of paint you with generalized characteristics. So that's weird to me. One thing, I forget what he said exactly, but there's a really cool guy named Dan Carlin who does these history videos and lectures and stuff. And he said, if you, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but he said, if you adopt the tactics of your enemies, you have to really look at yourself in the mirror and essentially really figure out who you're fighting for and make sure you're not turning into the bad guys, right? So in that context, he was talking specifically about fascism, and if you adopt fascist tactics, then that you might accidentally find out down the road you might be more like your enemies than the people you were trying to defend in the first place. So that's the first thing I disagree with about this tweet. In addition, he's talking about Jae Lee, who has done covers for this group. He's not talking about someone who is in the group that he is trying to denounce here, and calling his publisher, Jae Lee's, I guess, contractual employer, at least just for this opportunity, or person who signs the front of the check, so to speak, trying to indicate that he doesn't like it and trying to get Jae Lee to have less money in his pocketbook. Jae Lee is not a member of this Comicsgate, and he says it here, but he says, I must remove myself from association. You see, the real danger with this kind of mentality of guilt by association is, you think of certain eras like the McCarthy era in the United States, which is not exactly looked at very favorably. And Tom King is denouncing Jae Lee, who just did a cover, or has done covers for comics hate groups, supposedly, okay? Yet, here's the thing. If we look at Jae Lee's past, we just Google Jae Lee Watchmen here. Look at this. And I have a number of signed covers by Jae Lee. He has done a lot more work for Watchmen specifically versus Tom King, who just got on the commission to do Watchmen property. So as far as anybody should be concerned, Tom King is encroaching on Jae Lee territory here, and not vice versa, because Jae Lee is already an established artist for Watchmen specifically. So what does Tom King want to do? Does he want to check every single variant cover of every single book he ever gets commissioned to work on ever again? And if anybody has ever done work for a Comicsgate related person, he just won't work with them? What kind of world do we want to live in? Okay? Anybody who's seen The Crucible, everybody should rewatch this movie or reread this book, because that really shows the extreme danger of just pointing fingers and having people just shout out guilt by association, and essentially trying to crucify people just for being related to people that may have commit or even not commit any particular kind of crime. I'm just not interested in living in that universe. And look at this. Tom King then says, I spoke with Jay, and this is probably like a day later. He's not on Twitter, didn't know Comicsgate existed, and doesn't support hate of any kind. We're all good. Best possible outcome. Here's the thing, jerk. You tried already to get Jae Lee off of this book and express your disappointment with his association with this other group that doesn't have a manifesto or even a cohesive message as far as I can see. This is disgusting. Twitter really needs to have an option, at least, for people to activate. Say, give me a 6-hour delay on my tweet. So if I post something, it's automatically going to post in 6 hours, but within that 6-hour time frame, I am free to cancel it. Because I think the problem, too, is people do things with knee-jerk reaction and just leap to conclusions sometimes, and they're not thinking straight. You know, maybe someone's girlfriend just broke up with them, right? Maybe somebody's mom or dad died, and they're in the worst possible frame of mind they are. And this is why we can't, while I have to, I know this is going to be a paradox, but while I completely resent what Tom King does, I can't put Tom King in the I completely hate you forever camp. Even though I personally got burned so bad by that disgusting Batman 50 fiasco where they promised us for like 6 months we're going to have this wedding, and the wedding just doesn't even happen. I think comic stores had to get refunded by DC. It was a huge scandal. But I still think we need to acknowledge that people make mistakes, that people change over time, and to allow a path of redemption for people. So while I completely disagree with what Tom King states, and I think the kind of attitude he has here is reprehensible, I also don't think people should really go after him in like a real serious way. I don't think he should lose his livelihood. Like what I said earlier, I don't think if I adopt the tactics that people I dislike adopt, I think I'll turn into that person if I were to do so, and that's just not something I'm interested in. So, I think what we can just do is if Tom King puts out a book and he says something very controversial, we just don't have to buy it. And look, that's the blessing and curse of being on social media. No one's telling you that you have to be on social media. Okay? If you're putting yourself out there in this way, then you're rolling the dice here. And sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. And maybe we should all just be more like Jae Lee, okay? Just a really nice guy who does amazing work and really isn't very controversial in terms of what he says. He's controversial in his content in a way because he's so stylized and so good and so interesting. And wouldn't that be just a wonderful time to go back to in the comic world? So that's my 2 cents. This is your friendly neighborhood banker. Have a wonderful day, and let's all just go back to treating people like humans and allowing people to, not jumping to conclusions and demonizing people forever. Thanks.